Good morning, Jamalyn.
Good morning, Kim.
We want to welcome our listeners to One Thing More, continuing the conversation.
That's right.
Yes, and we are continuing the conversation about Sunday's sermon on attentiveness.
Attentiveness.
Yeah.
Are you paying attention to see the burning bush?
Yes, exactly.
Because then you can get something to put it out. No, just kidding. I have a really funny story about attentiveness. Okay. So Sunday, Dave and I, Dave, gave the sermon, and then at the end he invited me to come up and he wanted me to talk about my call story and how being attentive is part of receiving our call, paying attention to what God is saying to you. Yeah. So I was part of the sermon too. So the kids might have been paying attention a little bit more than usual. I don't know. But last night they were trying to tell Dave something, and he was on his iPad playing a game. And I think I heard Nathan say something to him like twice, and Dave's not even like grunting or anything, Finally, I hear Margaret, and she's like, "You're not being attentive." Oh, it's so great to be shamed by your children, isn't it?
They do listen, right? And they can give it back to you when it's most helpful for them.
Yeah. So, we were talking about being attentive, and the scripture was Exodus, when Moses sees the burning bush, takes his sandals off. And so, I thought it might be kind of interesting. Everyone got to hear my call story, but I don't know if you wanted to give a few tidbits of yours.
Yeah. Thanks for that invitation. My call story. So I was working in the consumer electronics industry, sort of kind of like you, like doing this business corporate thing that seemed to not have a lot of intrinsic value to me. So I remember I was sitting in a meeting, and we were discussing production and distribution of an 80-inch TV. I sort of mentioned that last week.
Yes, I said that would be my dream come true.
Right on that.
I need that to be delivered to my house.
And I was kind of like, first of all, like, who really needs that?
No one.
Yeah, and is this really what I should be doing with my talent, energy, time?
Yeah.
And so I just started thinking about that, and the industry was changing a lot, and I had always been a church kid, so I just started thinking about ways that I might, and praying about ways that I might use my talent in a different way, and really landed on mental health, but mental health in a faith setting, in a faith community, and how I felt like the churches I had been at, would just show people who were struggling emotionally the church down the street instead of doing something with them in their own church. So I really did a lot of discerning about how to marry those two things. And really, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, especially if the bishop is listening, but I got an MDiv so that I could talk to MDiv types about mental health. So, mental health has always been the focus of my ministry.
I'm not sure why that would bother him. We need about 14,000 more of you, for sure. So, it was interesting because I started reading the book Dave talked about Sunday, The Soul of Leadership. I'm not saying the book right. Will you put the book correct name in there? Notes. Okay. And it's an interesting book. I'm not sure lay people would jive with it. So far, it feels like it's directed more towards people in full-time ministry. Because there's even times where, because I'm not serving in a local church and you aren't either anymore, it feels a little off for me. But she says so many good things about people serving. And this quote could be for anybody. It could be for Sunday school teachers, just anybody serving in a church. And she said, I realized at one point I was tired of making Jesus accessible and fun and available to everyone else. I wanted that more for myself.
Oh, yeah.
And I think when you start to have those thoughts, that's the ding, ding, ding that should probably find someone in your office. It's definitely, to me, it was like, oh, that's a phrase of burnout for sure, because if you felt called to ministry in the first place and now all of a sudden you're resenting that, everyone else is getting time with Jesus and you aren't.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah. For people that work in a church, I mean, we have to be attentive to that, right?
Yeah.
That we also need to take time away and feed our souls, because you can't just pour out and pour out and pour out and not have something being poured into you.
Yeah. Dave asked me prior to this what were some ways that I myself try to be attentive or take time to be quiet. And he was really surprised by my answers, because I think he sees me as, very extroverted and everything. But there are times, especially since I've started Zami Fondois, where it's been so exciting to me, like everything going on, that I really have to take a couple minutes just to sit and breathe. And in some ways, like sit in the gratitude of that I get to do this, that people have been incredibly generous, that we're actually doing what we wanted to. And he was like, I had no idea you were doing that. I think I'm rubbing off on you. So how do you find yourself trying to be, like, what are some practices that you do to be attentive?
First of all, I want to say I'm not surprised that you do that, but it was funny to me that you were doing the sermon on attentiveness, because, when you first meet you, you are super outgoing and like you don't really meet strangers, and you definitely are a strong 7. And believe it or not, I am also a 7.
Oh, I believe that.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, with the 8 wing though.
Me too.
So my 8 sometimes has taken over. That's our corporate experience, I think, too. That
Yes.
8, like,
when we get
gotta...
so an 8 wing is someone when a 7 gets really stressed, they just want people to make a decision.
They operate in telling people
They're like,
what to do.
This is what we're doing, because as soon as whatever that conflict is gets out of the way, then you can go back to having fun.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So let's get this taken care of so we can have fun. Yeah, so sometimes I think I have to be really attentive to what is that I haven't had my practice, or what I do is I pay attention to, like, my internal voices, my internal talk. Like, so if, for instance, John was like, hey, we need to get going, you guys are late, it's 1:15 already, and I only have till 10, which he would never do, right? And in my head, I had some snarky comment for him, but I said something nice. And I'd be like, maybe you need to, like, get in your practice, because that wasn't kind, right? So I notice in my head that I'm, like, doing a thing that I wouldn't really do out loud. And so then I know that I need to create some margin for myself. And so, like, getting up early is one of my things, getting up earlier than I might normally would, so that I don't have to hear a TV or music or anything else in my house. Not having sound on in my car, just kind of driving.
That's your big thing right now. I feel like you bring that up almost every week.
Yeah. Just like, turn it all off.
Yeah.
And I think I am probably less extroverted than I was before I started doing counseling, like maybe pretty full time, because I'm attentive to what people are saying to me. And so sometimes I don't, like, want to hear somebody say something to me, and I need some personal time where I'm not talking or listening. Yeah. So just kind of trying to get that in. Yeah.
Well, I think for everyone, what would be interesting is to talk to someone who does like being kind of living life a little bit more in solitude than what maybe 2 7s who want to party all the time, party all the time, party all the time.
Exactly.
Because I think that would be, in some ways, difficult for people who would lean more towards solitude as well, because you're just always kind of quiet, that becomes a natural rhythm. And I wonder if they have to work really hard in that quietness to hear or listen better. Does that make sense?
It does. If that's your space where you're most comfortable, like, how are you attuned to the, small still voice or the burning bush or
because I don't want people that are listening to be like, well, I don't relate to them at all. I'm pretty introverted, and I like it best when I go to the grocery store and not one person talks to me, where you and I are probably offering suggestions to people.
Or,
like, that brand's way better than that brand. I'm basically half the progressive commercials, I've decided lately. So embarrassing. And if you don't know what the progressive commercials are, John will put a link to that too.
Oh, yeah.
John, you're doing an excellent job. That's one of the progressive commercials. But some people, like I have a friend, she's like, if my neighbor says hi to me, I'm ready to move. You know, like,
yeah.
she's like, I want to live in my
Yeah.
own space.
Yeah.
So I don't want people listening to think, well, I can't relate to what we're
Yeah,
saying.
because I'm like, oh, you couldn't even say hi?
I know, right. And of course, I'm like, why are we not having dinner every night together, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So, being attentive is really just, it goes for all personality types because God hasn't called just one personality type to
Not at all.
ministry.
Yeah, no.
I think the biggest shock people say to me that I get is that when they find out Dave is introverted, they're like, how can he be introverted? He preaches, he's on,
week.
and I'm
Yeah.
like, I think most
Yeah.
preachers
that's
are
true.
introverted.
Yeah, they are.
The ones that I know.
Yeah, I think that's, there's some research that most pastors are introverts. And they got enough to like preach every week or be on for that, but they also need to be like, woof.
After that,
I
it's
need a
nap time. Yeah.
in the
Right.
afternoon, yeah.
Something else in her book I thought was really fascinating that I wanted to talk to you about because of your background in mental health is I had never thought of this with Moses before. And she was talking about some of the decisions that Moses made early on in his sort of young adult life after he had left his people and gone back to live with the princess and all that. And then, how he killed the man and then tried to bury him in the sand and all that. So she was talking about how we have to really remember that Moses had gone through tremendous trauma as a child. And for some reason, that just kind of blew my mind that first of all, I had never thought of that myself. Of course he had gone through trauma, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, he's taken away from his birth mother and put in a basket and floated down the river.
and then returns
Yeah.
and is living with people even though
They're his people, but he doesn't know them and they don't know him.
and they probably know the arrangement, right? Like, he's only here for a little while.
Yeah.
Then he goes back where
And there had to be some resentment on their part, right?
I would
he's lived
think.
this charmed life. At least their perception of it is that he's lived this charmed life in the palace and they've been in slavery.
Right. Well, now you're jumping ahead, but I'm even just thinking about how he goes from living with his people back to the palace, where I bet in the palace he was not well received.
Yeah, this princess, like, who are you to bring this strange baby in? And,
Who's a Hebrew,
yeah,
by the way.
Yeah, and make us take care of him. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. So by the time, now skipping ahead, what you're saying is, and then he's given the decision that he's going to lead these folks, and they're like, you're not really one of us. I think the whole thing is kind of fascinating because I just never thought about the trauma that he probably went through in his everyday life as an adolescent.
Yeah, and an outsider. Because
And
that's
an
kind of when
outsider.
you notice that, right? As an
Oh my gosh,
adolescent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't thought about that either. I tell you, poor Moses. I just want to give him a hug.
Yeah.
So she mentioned that in her book. I thought that was kind of.
And wasn't he a stutterer?
I'm sure he would have been.
I think, yeah, and that makes sense too, right?
Oh, right, because that's why Aaron spoke for him.
Yep.
And then he goes back and he kind of sees how his people are living. They're and some of them would rather stay that way.
Yeah.
Because that was something they understood and they knew versus, I'm sure it was a fascinating
Yeah, it's generational
Transition.
trauma, it's personal trauma.
class.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all in there, people.
Yeah.
Read Exodus. It's really exciting.
The Bible, yeah, has a lot going on.
It does. It makes like Dynasty, that old show,
yeah.
look like it's nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you guys are talking about watching Grey's Anatomy season after season after season. Well, the Bible's got it all.
It has it all. I'm watching the newest season of Ozark.
Oh, don't even, girl. We just watched the second episode. Now is when we will turn this conversation to an Ozark wrap-up.
Speaking of.
Talking about childhood trauma.
Yeah, and crazy twists and turns,
Oh, yeah. We are 2 episodes in. And it is not something we can binge. We watch
One
one,
at a
and
time,
then
we
I'm
do
like,
too.
I'm going to need to watch a
Yeah.
Friends now to cleanse
Yeah,
the palate.
exactly.
It's very intense.
Exactly.
Very intense.
Yeah.
And kind of confusing right now, just by the by. So if anybody wants to send me a message and help me understand exactly what's going on, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yeah. How do we
Yeah.
get on Ozark?
Crazy Bible stories.
Crazy Bible
That
stories.
there's
yes.
nothing in real life that isn't
Yeah.
already been told about in the Bible, right?
So we talk about practices to kind of end our time together.
Yeah, so we talked about silence and quiet. We talked about frugality, which I kind of really tend to think of as more about sharing and being generous with what
Right.
you have. Like I have a plaque in my dining room. It says, "When you have more than you need, make your table longer, not your fence higher." To me, that says a
yes,
lot
I
about
love
not being
that.
frugal, like sharing what you have. That's because frugal, I don't know, it sounds very pejorative to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, attentiveness.
Right.
Yeah.
So for people that are right now really maybe wrestling with something, and the other thing I want to make clear is we are talking out of our own experience, which is being called to ministry, but people are called to all kinds of stuff that don't have a steeple involved.
Absolutely.
Someone might be feeling called from one profession to another, or someone might be called from working to staying home, or staying home to working outside the home.
Yeah.
There's all different ways that you can be called. I think the point I would want people to hear is that I truly believe that God wants all of us to be living a joyful and whole life. And if you're doing something that's cutting off the joy in your life, or something that is breaking you down regularly, then I think that's the moment in your life where you take a step back and you start to become attentive to what are those things in my life that are creating chaos, that are keeping me from the joy and wholeness. And then that's when you have to really become attentive to what God is going to offer you. For some, it might be like offering you a path out of that, or it might be that God's offering you a path into something new. So being attentive isn't just about like, well, I don't really want to be a pastor,
Yeah.
And I don't suggest it to everybody.
Right.
But it could be
Definitely not.
something else.
Yeah, I think you're right about being, I think that God has a way of, through the Holy Spirit, making you pretty uncomfortable in whatever it is that you're doing right now. Like, on Sunday you start, regretting, like, it's Monday, I've got to go to that job again, I've got to go to work. So already Monday has invaded your Sunday.
That's
because
good.
you don't want to, like, you're already thinking about what you don't want to do there, or how uncomfortable, or how much you dislike the place or the values of the organization. And so I think God has a way of making us real uncomfortable when it's time to move. And I think that's about not trusting that God has already opened the next door for us, and that the thing is out there if we're just willing to be faithful and take that step toward it, that God has got us covered. When we get uncomfortable and that calling is happening. And God needs us everywhere, not just in the church, mostly outside of the church.
Right.
So definitely a call is not about religious vocation necessarily.
Yeah, there have been times, I'm definitely, don't get me wrong, I'm so happy that I took the path I did. But right as I was finishing up my time where I had been working, I was noticing more and more people were coming to me. I had this cube that kind of backed up to a window. And a friend that I worked with gave me this ridiculous inflatable recliner chair thing that I thought was hysterical. And so, of course, I left it up in my cube. But people would come and sit in that chair, and all of a sudden I noticed they're telling me things. And there's always been like a part of me that's like, I wonder what had happened if I had stayed in that position, if there was, like, that was my way of sort of offering grace and a glimpse of who Jesus is in my life and who Jesus could be in their life. But I just had too bad of a case of indigestion. I had to get.
That's funny, because I had a similar, like, people would just always show up at my door and say, do you have a second? Can I talk to you about something? Or did you know?
And you're
I'm
like, I know everything.
and
Yes, I know.
And sometimes they would start to tell me and then not, and I'd be like, okay, and they'd be like, you don't care what I was gonna say, and I was
like,
like,
no.
not. I mean,
First of all, I did not invite you
right,
in.
You just,
So
I got stuff to do. Yeah.
And
Did people also say, I wish I could do what you're doing?
100%.
Exactly. I'm like, you can just do it, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how are we doing on time? Anybody have
20 minutes.
Okay. Well, I want to close with one more thing, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
So I wanted there was a part of my call story that I wanted to tell, but Dave was like, I just feel like, we got to keep it tight. And of course I was like, well, you could give up 5 minutes of your sermon time and
wink,
give me
wink.
5 minutes to tell more about my
I was
call
like,
story.
when's Jamalyn coming
But
up?
whatevs. So when I was in sales, I actually worked for this amazing woman, and our director of marketing for the corporation was in our sales office. And our sales office was, at the time, was one of the better in the company. So we got a lot more attention, for sure. And anyway, he, and you know how like sales offices are, it's hustle and bustle. And back then too, like cell phones were just coming on the scene.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of people came back to the office because you couldn't do things remote.
Right,
like if you
right.
wanted to turn in orders or whatever.
Yeah.
So this particular day, it was really busy. There were a lot of salespeople in there. And all of a sudden over the intercom, it's like, what's funny is I can't remember this man's name. His story is so much a big part of my story, and I couldn't tell you his name if you gave me $1 million. So let's call him John. Oh, well, not John, because John's our producer. Let's call him Max.
Okay.
So Max is like, I need everyone in the conference room or whatever. So we all, and that never happens, by the way. So we all come in, and he's like, I need to share something with everyone. And to be honest, I'm not supposed to go public with this yet, but something's just nagging on me that I need to tell you all. And he said, at the end, tomorrow there'll be a corporate-wide memo that goes out announcing my resignation, that I'm going back to school to get my master's of social work.
Oh.
And he said, I never meant to end up in marketing. He took a job with like the local phone company, which then got bought, when I was in college. And then when I graduated, I thought I'd work for a year, save some money, and then go back to school to get my master's. And he's like, and now it's been 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And I just feel like I still need to do this.
Yeah.
Well, I knew exactly why he called everybody together, because in that moment I had been accepted to Duke, and I was trying to decide if I should work 8 more months, save more money, and then start school in the fall versus as a January student. And I was really struggling with that decision. And in that moment, I was like, no, it's time. It's got to be now. Fast forward 4 months from like when I started Duke, and that company had to file bankruptcy. And I would have been probably not without a job, but one of the people on the chopping block. And also like all of the things like my stock options, all that kind of stuff, all of that would have been out the window.
Yeah.
That is, and I would have missed 4 months of school, when I could have gone. So I've always been really thankful that he, answered that nudge, because it made me say, no, it's now. Like I'm doing it.
That's another thing people can pay attention to, right? What are people that you just are in relationship with somehow saying that resonates with what you're thinking or feeling called to do? Because those are also, I think, God's way of being like, okay, like you should be listening, or this is my voice again.
Around that same time, I was in the office on a Saturday, which was rare, and a very good friend of mine called me at the office looking for me. Again, people, no cell phones.
Yeah.
And she was going through a very difficult time, and I was just listening and talking and offering her, a few suggestions. Keep in mind, I'm 22, 23. What do I know at that point? At the end of the conversation, she says to me, have you ever thought of being a pastor? I think you'd be really good at it. And little did she know that that was all I had been wrestling with.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and so you're right. Like listening, I think God does put voices or puts messages and friends and family to kind of help us know
Absolutely.
what the next direction is. So, you know, you could think you're just having coffee with a friend and it turns into this incredible holy moment where all of a sudden you leave thinking, am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to start my own business?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to move to Haiti? You know, who knows,
Yeah,
right?
Right. Yeah, and ideas that you sort of haven't had on your own that come but that resonate. Be attentive to that.
Yeah. Well, we are at the end of our time, and
Once again,
I appreciate having a chance to share that little last story.
thank you for sharing.
Well, we will be back next week.
Talking about leadership.
Leadership, which, as you can probably imagine, is a topic Kim and I love a lot. So, as sevens, we're in it to win it.
7 with a strong 8
Seven
wing.
with a strong 8. We like making decisions. We like being asked to make decisions.
That's right.
I always tell people I've got all kinds of opinions, and I'll share them with you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Have a great week, everybody.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.